Shalom, shalom, my friends. Welcome back to Jerusalem. Welcome back to Zion. Great to be with you again this week as we study the Parashat Shavua, the weekly Torah portion. We are ending Sefer Bereshit, the book of Genesis. This week we are up to the 12th Torah portion since we began learning together. Let's get started. We have this week Parashat Vayechi, the Torah portion of Vayechi, and it begins, if you want to open your books to the book of Genesis, chapter 47, verse 28, and it says, Jacob lived in the land of Egypt 17 years. That's how we begin. And his health is failing. Jacob's health is failing, and he brings together his children to bless them. Each one of them an individual blessing. Let's have a look at those three of those blessings and understand where the crown of leadership is given for future generations. If you turn in your Bible to chapter 49, verse 1, we begin with Reuben, the eldest child, Jacob's firstborn. And in fact, Reuben is not given that mantle of leadership, is not given that leadership role for the future. And why? If you look there in that first blessing, chapter 49, verse 4, you'll see here, because you mounted your father's bed, then you desecrated him. You desecrated God. The idea here that Reuben, who should have been the leader, who should have had the blessings of the firstborn, actually interrupted in the married life of his father, in the marriages of his father, his 4 wives, as we saw earlier. So he does not get that leadership crown. Joseph, you might think, and if you look there at chapter 49, verse 22 through verse 26, he gets beautiful blessings. And clearly he is still a favorite there of Jacob. Even on Jacob's deathbed, he's showing tremendous love, perhaps even favoritism for Joseph. And he speaks about the blessings he received from his ancestors, from his fathers. And he hopes that these blessings will come upon Joseph. But the crown of leadership is given to Yehuda, to Judah. And if you look there at chapter 49, line 8, we see here in Hebrew, Yehuda ata yoducha achicha. Your brothers will acknowledge you. He is being given the leadership role. He, in fact, and from him, from Judah, will come the kings of Israel. The kingship, including King David, will come from the line of Judah. As it says at verse 10 in that same chapter 49, Lo yasul shevet mi Yehuda. What is that? That scepter of kingship. That crown of kingship shall not depart Judah ever. Now the question is, why wasn't it given to Joseph? And I've done some study of the commentators and people who have written about this. Perhaps Joseph, as that second in charge of Egypt, perhaps after all he's been through, perhaps all he's done now to provide for his family and for those who have come down to Egypt during that famine, perhaps he should be leader of the brothers and of the future generations to come in the nation of Israel. But no. And perhaps the answer there, and some of the answers I've read, come from the way he dealt with his father's death. If you look there at chapter 50, in verse 1, we see that Joseph has Jacob, his father, embalmed. And it says he wept over him and he kissed him. And Joseph ordered the servants and the physicians to embalm his father. And then in verse 3 of chapter 50, there was a 40-day term was completed, for this is the term of the embalmed. And then Egypt bewailed Jacob, mourned him for 70 days. This, in fact, is contrary to Jewish law. This is contrary to Torah law. This is contrary to the way that Jewish people deal with their dead and how they respect the dead. Every man and every woman is created in the image of God. And it is our belief that when you die, you are returned as quickly as possible to the ground from which you came, and that your body should be allowed to decompose and return to dust. So there is a question here about whether Joseph could be the leader of generations to come when perhaps he was very heavily influenced by Egyptian customs. Some say he wanted to preserve his father's body, so out of respect for the body and for the dead, that body should arrive back in the land of Canaan and the land of Israel in a good state, and that's why he embalmed him. But in fact, most of the commentators say this was not a great decision, that he was influenced, that he wanted to respect Egyptian culture and Egyptian customs, and so he took those into his family and upon himself. Judah, on the other hand, he was a uniquely Jewish source, and rather than a foreign one, he was chosen, therefore, to carry on that kingship, to carry on that leadership role within the Jewish people, within the nation. You know, today we live in a modern world, and there are many, many positive and constructive influences in the world around us. But we must be very careful what we do with these influences and make sure that we choose just the positive ones, and those that help us to grow within our families and our communities. Where are we rooted? Where do our feet stand? Where are we cemented within the cultures in which we live? What influences do we allow to come into our lives? And how do we allow them to affect us spiritually? Jacob laid out a moral path, the road that he wanted his children to travel on. And when he blessed them all individually, he didn't just give them blessings. He didn't just compliment them and feel good. But those who needed strong feedback, constructive criticism, a push or a stark reminder of their faults and what they need to work on, they were given. Those who get angry, those who interfere in spheres of life that was not for them, those who are not fulfilling their role in the nation, those people were given that reminder. So today, which would have been in fact my father's 83rd birthday, him having passed away and left us just short of 2 years ago, I'm reminded very strongly of those blessings that our father gave us and my mother as well. And yet he was always there to remind us of the path best traveled. And I would say this, that my father in his public roles, he was never the king of Egypt or the number 2 in Egypt, but in the public and political and other roles that he held in New Zealand, in the country which we were born and raised, he made sure to keep his feet very much cemented in Jewish life and in Jewish tradition, and he would not compromise. And I recall very strongly how people spoke about his desire to keep the Shabbat and his desire to protect the Shabbat and make it holy for his family and not appear in public events, for example, on the Sabbath. These are things which meant a great deal. And to stick by the dietary laws at public events and request that people help him with that so that he can indeed follow the Jewish customs, even though he was contributing fully to public modern life and modern and public life contributing to him and to his family. We have a lot to learn from this week's portion, and we have a lot to learn from our ancestors and our parents. And in this time when so many young people are looking for opportunities to give, and they're looking at their parents and their grandparents and they're saying, what meant most to my ancestors and to my family? Our prayer and our hope is that those who are soon to adopt and take upon themselves and to inherit generations of community life and contribution to community life and to philanthropy and to good causes and to wonderful organizations around the world that do good for those in need, our prayer is that they will take wonderful influences from their families and continue on that path. I wish you all a good Sabbath, a Shabbat Shalom, and look forward to learning with you again very soon.